At my husband's funeral, my son stood cheering as the lawyer announced his inheritance. $30 million for the company, the Manhattan penthouse with sweeping views of Central Park, and the gleaming family yacht that once hosted governors and celebrities. The air filled with congratulations, pats on the back, and even laughter. When my name was finally called, all I received was a crumpled envelope. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single plane ticket to Rome. My son's laughter rang louder than the church bells that tolled that gray morning. He smirked at me and whispered to the relatives nearby, "Look at her face. A ticket, that's all." He thought the humiliation would break me, but he didn't know that 6 words written by my husband would change everything. My name is Linda Carver. I am 62 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and until that day, I believed I had lived a life of quiet devotion to my family. Yet standing there in black with the scent of lilies filling the church, I realized devotion meant nothing when those you gave everything to only saw you as weak. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more. Grandma Life Stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. The lawyer tried to continue, his voice shaking, but the room erupted. My son Charles lifted his hands like a man who had just won a championship. Amelia, his polished wife in her pearl necklace, kissed his cheek and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Rome will teach your mother how to survive without anyone to take care of her." Their cruelty wasn't hidden. It was proudly displayed, like jewelry meant to blind. My daughter Claire, who had always been gentler, reached for my hand, but Charles pulled her away, reminding everyone that this was his moment. I stared at the paper in my hands, thin, cheap, edges torn. Compared to the glistening yacht keys that had been handed to my son, my envelope looked like a joke. Yet as his laughter echoed, I raised my eyes and met his. I said clearly enough for the room to fall silent, "A wrinkled envelope can hold more than a yacht, my son." My voice didn't shake. For the first time that day, Charles hesitated, only for a second, but I saw it. The crowd murmured. Some dismissed my words as the rambling of a grieving widow. Others shifted uneasily, perhaps sensing something more. Charles quickly recovered, puffing out his chest. "Mother, enjoy your little trip. Rome is beautiful this time of year. Maybe you'll find a cafe to sit in and remember what real wealth looks like." Amelia laughed as though he had delivered the wittiest line of the day. I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket and folded my hands. Outwardly, I looked calm. Inside, my mind spun with questions. Why Rome? Why a ticket instead of money? Why did Richard, my husband of nearly 4 decades, believe this mattered more than all the properties, accounts, and investments? My heart hurt, but not from humiliation. It hurt from knowing Richard had left me something only I was meant to discover. As the service continued, I caught myself remembering the last conversation I had with Richard. He was weak, lying in his bed at home, the machines beeping softly around him. He took my hand, squeezed it with surprising strength, and whispered 6 words. I had thought at the time they were meant to comfort me, but now, as I held that envelope, I realized they were instructions. Rome holds truth. Don't lose faith. When the final hymn ended, the guests filed out in clusters. Some avoided my gaze, ashamed by the way they had laughed. Others smiled politely, their sympathy as false as their condolences. Charles and Amelia were surrounded by people congratulating them, as if they had achieved the fortune through merit, not inheritance. Claire walked silently beside me, her eyes full of worry. I felt eyes on me from every direction, but I straightened my back. The humiliation I suffered was real, but so was the fire beginning to burn inside me. I had been underestimated before, I had been mocked before, and every time I learned that being underestimated was its own kind of weapon. They thought I was finished, they thought Rome was an exile, they had no idea Rome was the beginning. As the black cars lined up outside, Charles waved the keys of the yacht like a trophy. "We'll have a party this weekend," he announced, "to christen the next chapter of the Carver Empire." His words were sharp, directed at me. I smiled faintly, reached into my coat, and touched the envelope again. 6 words, a plane ticket, and a faith my son could never understand. That was all I had. But sometimes, all is enough. When the noise of the funeral faded into memory, the silence of my small house felt louder than any church bell. I sat with that envelope resting on the table, its edges still carrying the warmth of my hand. Richard had left me this one strange path to follow, but the truth was, his life had been filled with hidden doors long before he died. He was a man who locked drawers as though they held more than papers, who kept a safe in his office that he alone touched, and who never allowed me near what he called his Italian files. For years I thought it was simply business formality. But in the stillness of widowhood, I remembered the way his eyes always clouded when Rome was mentioned, the way his hand would hover over that drawer before turning the key and walking away. Richard was not cruel to me, not in the obvious ways. He gave me comfort, security, the respect of being his wife. But he also gave me secrets, and secrets have their own weight. I had long carried them without question, until the moment that envelope slipped into my hand. Charles had always despised the fact that I knew his father better than he did. As a boy, he burned with envy whenever Richard praised my patience or calmness. He grew up desperate to prove that strength was measured only in numbers and titles. By the time he reached adulthood, he no longer hid his disdain. "You're just a dependent," he told me once, his eyes glittering. "Without Dad's money, you'd have nothing." He believed it. And perhaps, in those moments, I almost believed it too. But Claire never did. My daughter had a gentleness her brother could not comprehend. She watched everything with quiet eyes that seemed to cut deeper than any loud accusation. She never sought wealth or titles, only truth. While Charles performed for Richard's approval, Claire watched in silence, noticing the cracks no one else cared to see. She was the one who placed her hand on mine after the will was read, whispering, "There must be more to this, Mother. He wouldn't leave you with nothing." Charles scoffed at her faith. He had walked out of the funeral hall intoxicated with his inheritance, Amelia clinging to his arm like a second shadow. Amelia, his wife, was sharp as glass. To the world, she wore charm like a diamond necklace. To me, she revealed her truer nature only in passing remarks and narrowed eyes. She was the type who could smile while setting fire to the floor beneath you. 2 days after the funeral, I overheard the two of them in the lawyer's office. I had arrived early, still thinking there might be some loose paper, some overlooked detail. Instead, I found myself standing in the hallway, the door cracked open just enough for their voices to escape. "We should move her out of that cottage," Amelia whispered. "It's embarrassing for the company image, Charles. A widow clinging to scraps? Let her go quietly." Charles chuckled, low and cruel. "She has nowhere else to go. She'll fold. She always folds." Amelia's tone sharpened. "Unless she fights. Women like her, sometimes pride gives them teeth." I leaned against the wall, my hands cold. They were already planning my exile, yet the words didn't shatter me. Instead, they brought a strange calm. They thought I was weak. They thought I would beg. I walked into the office before either of them could leave. They froze, their surprise quickly masked by condescension. I met their eyes, steady, unblinking. "You think I'll weep and plead for scraps?" My voice was soft, but it did not tremble. "Try me. But remember this, chess isn't won by the loudest move. It's won by the one you never see coming." For the first time in years, Charles had no words. Amelia smirked as though amused, but I could see a flicker of unease in her gaze. That night, Claire sat with me by the fire, her hand curled around a mug of tea. "What if this is only a cruel joke?" she asked. "A ticket to nowhere?" I looked at the flame dancing in the hearth, remembering Richard's face in his last days. "Even jokes have authors," I said quietly, "and your father was never a man who wasted ink. If he left me this, it was because the story isn't over." The house creaked in the wind, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something stirring in me. Not grief, not humiliation, but resolve. Richard had left a game unfinished, and I intended to see it through. The morning after that confrontation, I stood by the window of my cottage, staring out at the frost settling across the grass. The world outside seemed calm, untouched by the venom I had overheard. But inside me, something had shifted. The woman Charles believed would fold, the one Amelia imagined would slip quietly into irrelevance, was gone. What remained was something steadier, sharpened by betrayal. I walked through the rooms Richard and I had once shared, each corner still carrying traces of him. His scent clung faintly to his chair. His handwriting lingered on notes in the margins of his books. Grief pressed against my chest, but beneath it lived a growing clarity. Richard had left me very little in the eyes of the world, but he had left me something more dangerous than gold: mystery. And mystery unsettles the greedy more than loss ever can. That afternoon, I went into town to meet the lawyer, Mr. Green, under the pretense of clarifying paperwork. As I stepped into his office, I noticed Charles and Amelia leaving through the side door, their laughter fading down the hallway. They hadn't expected to see me. Charles muttered something under his breath and tightened his grip on Amelia's arm. She turned her head just enough to give me a smile that dripped with mockery. Inside, Green adjusted his glasses nervously when I asked him if Richard had left anything more. He shuffled through his files and cleared his throat. "What you've received is precisely what Mr. Carver specified, Mrs. Carver. 1 envelope, 1 ticket, nothing more." I leaned forward slightly. "And a letter to be opened only when I arrive in Rome. Isn't that what you told the others?" His eyes darted down to his papers again. "That is correct." I thanked him and left, my mind turning. Green's discomfort told me something. He knew more than he dared say. The problem was that my enemies already suspected it too. That evening, Charles appeared at my door. He didn't knock gently. He pushed his way inside as though he already owned the ground beneath my feet. Amelia followed, her heels tapping across my floor like hammers. "Mother," Charles said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we've been thinking. It's not good for you to stay here alone. The company will be restructuring, and the cottage will be inconvenient." I folded my hands calmly. "Inconvenient for whom? You or Amelia's polished image?" Amelia tilted her head. "We're offering you dignity. Better to leave quietly than be a burden. Surely you see that." I looked at them both, their arrogance spilling across my living room, and I felt something inside me harden. They were circling like vultures, certain that I was already a corpse. But they had miscalculated. "You speak of dignity," I said slowly, "as though you could give it. But dignity isn't a gift. It's a choice. And I haven't chosen to leave." Charles's face flushed red. "Don't play games with me, Mother. You've got nothing. Father left you with nothing." I rose then, meeting his eyes, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. "Nothing you can see, Charles. That doesn't mean it isn't there." Amelia smirked, but the mask cracked for an instant. She leaned closer, her whisper meant to sting. "Rome will teach you how small you really are." I let the words linger in the air. Then I smiled, just faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps Rome will teach you that the smallest seed grows into the strongest vine." They didn't stay long after that. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the silence of my cottage once more. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with certainty. Their cruelty had given me strength I hadn't realized I still possessed. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, the one Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. "They believe I am finished," I wrote, "but I am only beginning. I will follow this ticket. I will open that letter. And when the truth comes, it will not whisper. It will thunder." I closed the book, extinguished the lamp, and let the darkness settle around me. The board was set, the pieces already moving. Charles thought he had won. Amelia thought she had silenced me. They were both wrong. The ticket lay on my kitchen table for days, the paper softening at the edges where my fingers had traced it over and over. I stared at the black letters that spelled out a destination I had never dreamed of seeing again. Rome, a one-way flight, scheduled with exact precision. The date loomed like a challenge, daring me to choose. Claire came by every evening after work, carrying groceries or a warm meal, trying to soften the edges of my solitude. She sat across from me one night, her hand brushing against the ticket. Her eyes held both worry and curiosity. "What if it's just a cruel trick, Mother? What if he meant it as some kind of farewell, nothing more?" I looked at her, the firelight catching the sincerity in her face. Claire had her father's steadiness, but her gaze was sharper, as though she'd learned to see beyond the illusions that blinded everyone else. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Even a trick has an author," I said softly. "And your father was not a man who wasted ink. He didn't write meaningless lines. If he left me this, it was because the story isn't over." She bit her lip, hesitating. "But what if you go and find nothing? What if Charles is right and this is all there is for you? A flight? A room in some foreign city? And an empty promise?" I straightened my shoulders, my voice firmer than I expected. "Then I'll still know I tried, and I will know that I trusted your father one last time, because I believe he knew what he was doing. He always did, even when we couldn't see it." Claire's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "Then go, Mother. If you believe it, then you must go." That night, I pulled Richard's old suitcase from the closet, the leather worn, the handle nearly frayed. It had traveled with him through countless business trips, journeys that always ended with him stepping back through our door carrying more secrets than souvenirs. I placed the ticket inside, along with a few dresses, my worn black coat, and a photograph of Claire and me from years ago. As I folded Richard's last scarf into the bag, I remembered something he once told me during one of our rare, quiet evenings. We had been playing chess by the fire. He leaned back, eyes shadowed by thought, and said, "In chess, even a pawn can make a king tremble if it moves at the right time." I hadn't understood then, but now the words echoed inside me like a promise. Maybe he had been preparing me for this journey all along. The morning of the flight, Claire drove me to the airport. The autumn air was sharp, the trees shedding their leaves like secrets falling silently to the ground. She parked by the curb, and we sat in the car for a moment, neither of us willing to break the silence. Finally, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "I promise," I said, though we both knew promises couldn't guard against the unknown. I walked through the sliding glass doors, the sound of rolling suitcases and airport announcements surrounding me. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation. Every step brought me closer to whatever Richard had hidden, closer to the letter I was forbidden to open until I reached Rome. When I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass, my black coat, my tired eyes, my hair pinned back neatly. To anyone else, I might have looked like a widow running from grief, but I knew better. I was not running. I was following a thread Richard had left for me, a thread that might unravel everything. As I settled into my seat on the plane, the engines beginning to hum, I pressed the ticket against my palm and whispered to myself, "This is no farewell. This is the first move." The plane lifted off, Detroit fading beneath the clouds, the horizon stretching open like a page waiting to be written. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane climbed higher, the city lights of Detroit fading into a patchwork of stars. I sat wedged between two strangers, my black coat folded neatly over my lap, and the envelope tucked securely in my handbag. Around me, people adjusted pillows, opened snacks, slipped into restless sleep. To them, this was just another journey. To me, it was a crossing into the unknown, a chapter written by a hand no longer alive. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool window, watching the faint glow of the wingtip cut through the clouds. That was when I remembered one of Richard's favorite lessons. We had been playing chess years ago, the board between us illuminated by the firelight. He moved a pawn forward, deliberate, steady. I laughed at the time. "It's just a pawn," I said. He looked at me, his eyes shadowed with that sharp focus he reserved for both business and games. "Don't underestimate a pawn, Linda. Even the smallest piece can make a king tremble if it moves at the right moment." His words returned to me now, echoing with more weight than they ever carried before. I reached into my bag, pulling out the ticket once more, running my fingers across the paper. I thought of Charles and Amelia, their laughter still ringing in my ears. They believed I was finished, humiliated, But Richard had moved a pawn across the board, and I was the one carrying it. The man in the aisle seat beside me was already asleep, his mouth open, his snores drowning out the hum of the engines. On the other side, a woman watched a movie on her tablet without headphones, the muffled sound of dialogue leaking into the air. Between them, I felt trapped and invisible, but perhaps that was a blessing. Invisible pieces are the most dangerous. I closed my eyes, imagining Charles's face when the lawyer handed me the envelope. He had been waiting for that moment, waiting for me to crumble in front of the family. I could still see the smirk etched into his features, Amelia's gleeful sneer at his side. They had won in their minds, but victory claimed too quickly can be a dangerous illusion. I opened my eyes again, staring at the seat back in front of me, and whispered quietly so no one could hear, "You always did like your games, Richard. Well, I'll play." The flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. When one stopped at my row, she smiled, her accent warm, her eyes kind. "Something to drink, ma'am?" "Just water," I replied. She handed me a small bottle, and as I twisted it open, I thought again of Richard's face during our last real conversation. His voice had carried a tired weight, as if he wanted to tell me more but couldn't. "There will come a time, Linda," he had said, his hand hovering above the chessboard, "when you'll have to trust the move even if you don't see the board." I hadn't understood. But now, as the condensation from the water bottle cooled my palm, I realized he had been preparing me for this journey. He wanted me to follow, to trust that his hand still guided me beyond the grave. Hours passed in fragments of restless half-sleep. I dreamed of Charles, sitting in a leather chair, watching his empire crumble beneath him. I dreamed of Amelia's sharp voice breaking into silence, her charm useless in the face of truth. I dreamed of Claire, standing strong beside me, her eyes no longer full of worry, but of pride. When I awoke, the cabin was hushed. The woman beside me had fallen asleep, her head tilted awkwardly against her tablet. The man still snored. I sat awake, my thoughts weaving together into something I hadn't dared name until now. Revenge. Not the screaming, destructive kind. No, something quieter, sharper. A justice born from patience, the kind that slips into place so perfectly no one sees it coming until it's too late. I placed my hand over the envelope again, feeling the weight of the ticket and the letter waiting for me in Rome. Richard had orchestrated this. He had known Charles's hunger for wealth, Amelia's cruelty, the arrogance that blinded them both. And he had known me, the woman they thought weak, the pawn they dismissed. The engines hummed, steady as a heartbeat. I thought again of Richard sacrificing his queen once, years ago, in a match that had baffled me. "Why would you give up the most powerful piece?" I had asked, shocked. "Power isn't about what you hold," he'd said, sliding his knight across the board to deliver the final blow. "It's about what you're willing to lose to gain something greater." Now I understood. He had given Charles and Amelia everything they thought they wanted. The queen, the king, the glittering empire. But perhaps all of it was nothing more than hollow pieces, traps dressed as prizes. And me? He had given me the move no one else noticed. A pawn, a plane ticket, a mystery that might unravel everything. The seatbelt sign flicked on as we began our descent. The captain's voice broke over the intercom, announcing the approach to Rome. I pressed my palm against the window, watching as the lights of the city glimmered beneath the clouds. Rome. A place Richard had locked away in silence for decades, a place that now held the answers he had left only for me. As the plane lowered, my heart pounded not with fear, but with certainty. Whatever waited for me beyond the gate, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of Richard's final game, and I was no longer the widow dismissed at a funeral. I was the player he had chosen to carry his last move. The wheels touched down with a jolt, the sound echoing through the cabin like a starting gun. The passengers stirred awake, gathering bags, speaking in hurried voices. I sat still for a moment longer, my hands folded over the envelope, whispering once more into the hum of voices around me. The pawn has moved. The airport was a rush of voices and footsteps, a symphony of languages overlapping one another. I stepped off the plane with only my suitcase, the crumpled envelope, and the weight of questions pressing against my chest. The air was warmer than I expected, carrying the scent of exhaust, coffee, and something faintly sweet drifting in from the open doors beyond customs. As the line shuffled forward, I clutched my passport and ticket. When the officer glanced at me, his question was simple. "Purpose of visit?" I hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering honestly. "I don't know." He blinked, stamped the page, and waved me through without another word. The arrivals hall was chaos. Families embracing with tears, tourists looking lost with maps in their hands, drivers holding up signs for passengers they were paid to find. My eyes scanned the crowd, unsure what I was looking for, until I saw it. My name printed clearly on a white card. Carver. Linda Carver. The man holding it was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that looked almost out of place amid the swirl of backpacks and rolling luggage. His face was lined with years, but his eyes were steady. When I approached, he smiled politely and bowed his head slightly. "Mrs. Carver? My name is Marco. I was asked to meet you." His English carried the lilt of his homeland, careful and deliberate. I hesitated, the airport spinning around me. "By whom?" "By your husband. He arranged everything months ago." The words struck me like a blow. Richard! Even in death, his hand was guiding me. Marco reached for my suitcase, his manner respectful yet firm, as though refusal was not truly an option. I let him take it, my grip tightening on the envelope in my hand. We walked out to the car park, where a sleek black sedan waited. As the city noise swirled around us, I slid into the back seat. The leather was cool, smelling faintly of polish and time. Marco started the engine, and Rome began to unfold before my eyes. The streets were alive with scooters darting like fish in a stream, cars honking as though conversation was best held through horns. Buildings leaned close to one another, centuries of history stacked like layers in a storybook. Narrow alleys revealed glimpses of cafes, laundry strung between windows, children laughing in rapid Italian. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "To Montuori Estate, in the Sabine Hills. It is 1 hour north of here." I frowned, the name unfamiliar. Richard never mentioned an estate in Italy. Marco's eyes softened. He owned it for 45 years. He visited every September, always alone. The words lodged in my throat. 45 years. My mind raced. How could a man live 2 lives so completely? What had Richard hidden from me all this time? Marco reached into the front pocket of his jacket and passed back a sealed envelope. The paper was heavier than the one from the funeral, the handwriting just as familiar, but steadier, as though written before illness took its toll. "For you," Marco said simply. I held it with trembling hands, staring at the name scrawled across the front. Linda, not "my dear wife" or "Mrs. Carver," just Linda, plain and direct, as though he were speaking to me across the years. My pulse quickened as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded note and another slip of paper, smaller, with a date and a name. Isabella, October 19th, noon. The note itself was brief. "Linda, if you've trusted me this far, then trust me one step further. Meet Isabella. She will tell you what I could not. Do not turn away, no matter what you hear. This is your path now." I folded the letter carefully, pressing it against my heart. The name swirled in my head. Isabella. Who was she? Why had Richard left me to find her? As the car wove out of the city, the streets giving way to rolling hills lined with vineyards and olive groves, the weight of the truth pressed harder against me. Richard had always been a man of compartments. His business here, his family there, his secrets sealed away in drawers. But this was different. This was a door left wide open, and he was daring me to step through. The further we drove, the more the land seemed to breathe differently. The city's chaos faded into silence, broken only by birdsong and the hum of cicadas. Marco turned onto a narrow road lined with cypress trees, their shadows stretching across the stone walls. At the end, a pair of gates swung open at our approach, as if recognizing me. When the villa came into view, I gasped. Honey-colored stone bathed in the setting sun, balconies draped with vines, gardens spilling with roses and lavender. It was not the cold grandeur of Charles's penthouse or the sterile yacht Amelia adored. It was alive, lived in, loved. As we pulled to a stop, I stepped out, my feet sinking into the gravel. The air was fragrant with earth and wine, carrying whispers of a life Richard had never allowed me to see. And standing in the doorway, waiting, was a woman. Her hair was silver, pulled back neatly. Her posture carried both grace and gravity. And her eyes, gray, sharp, hauntingly familiar, locked onto mine with a look that stripped the breath from my chest. Marco's voice was quiet, reverent. "Mrs. Carver, this is Isabella." The world seemed to tilt. My husband's secrets had not been buried with him. They were standing before me, alive, waiting to be revealed. The woman in the doorway did not move at first. She studied me the way a hawk studies a trembling rabbit in a field, her gaze sharp enough to pierce skin. The air between us was heavy, charged with something I could not yet name. My grip on the envelope tightened, my fingers damp with sweat. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate and dignified. The gravel shifted beneath her shoes, crunching softly, until she stood directly in front of me. "So," she said, her voice smooth, her English tinged with a lyrical Italian cadence. "You are Linda." I swallowed, nodding once. "And you must be Isabella." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Your husband prepared me for this moment, though he never prepared you, did he?" Her words cut deep, but I refused to flinch. Richard was not a man who prepared anyone fully. He always left pieces missing from the puzzle. Her eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw sadness there, but it hardened quickly. "Do you think you were the only woman he built a life with?" The question landed like a stone in my chest. I had always wondered about the Italian files, the solitary trips, the guarded silences when I asked about his travels. Yet part of me had clung to the hope that it was simply business, nothing more. Now, standing here in front of Isabella, that hope crumbled into dust. "I thought," I began, my voice breaking before I steadied it. "I thought I was his wife, his only wife." Her laugh was soft, bitter, almost pitying. "So did I." We stood in silence, two women bound by a man who had given us each half a life. Behind us, the villa loomed, its walls carrying decades of secrets. Marco shifted uncomfortably by the car, but said nothing, knowing this was not his moment to intrude. Finally, Isabella turned, gesturing toward the open doors. "Come inside. If we must unravel the same story, let us at least do it seated." The villa's interior was nothing like the cold wealth Charles paraded back home. The walls were lined with photographs, faded black and white portraits of soldiers, weddings, vineyards blooming with life. I saw Richard in some of them, young, smiling in a way I had never seen in the States. In one, he stood beside Isabella, both of them radiant, their hands clasped like newlyweds. My throat tightened. He had lived an entire existence here, a world hidden from me. Isabella poured 2 glasses of deep red wine and handed me one. She lifted hers, but did not drink. This vineyard was ours. Ours before he built his empire across the ocean. Ours before he chose to divide his heart between continents. I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Why tell me now? You could have kept this buried. You could have shut the gates and left me outside." She tilted her head, considering. "Because Richard insisted. He wrote to me before he died. He said you would come, that you needed to know the truth. I am not doing this for you, Linda. I am doing this because he asked me one final time to open the doors." I set the glass down, my hands trembling. "Do you hate me?" Her expression shifted, more weary than cruel. "I hated you once. I thought you were the thief who stole him from me. But as the years passed, I realized he had stolen from both of us. He gave us each half of a man, and in the end, neither of us truly had him. The honesty in her voice was unexpected. Instead of fury, it carried resignation, even sorrow. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words settle. "Doubt and lies can kill a marriage," I said quietly. "But sometimes lies can also protect, if they are used by someone who knows how to wield them." Her eyes narrowed, studying me with a new kind of interest. "You are not the weeping widow I imagined." "No," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "Humiliation has a way of sharpening the mind. Richard may have left us with betrayal, but he also left us with pieces of a game he wanted finished, and I intend to finish it." Isabella's face softened slightly. She lifted her glass and finally drank. "Perhaps you are not my enemy, Linda. Perhaps you are my ally." The clock in the corner struck softly, its chime echoing through the room. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. I thought of Charles, of Amelia, of their smug laughter when the envelope was placed in my hand. They believed I was walking away from wealth, from power. Instead, I was walking straight into a truth that would undo them. I looked back at Isabella, who was watching me with an intensity that bordered on challenge. "Then let's stop circling around the same wound. Tell me everything." She nodded once, the steel in her eyes flickering into something closer to respect. "Very well. But what you hear next, Linda, will not be easy." I leaned forward, bracing myself. Whatever secrets Richard had left buried in these walls, I was ready. The name slipped from Isabella's lips as naturally as if she were speaking of the weather. "Antonio." I blinked, the sound of it hanging between us like a bell tolling in the distance. "Who is Antonio?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. Her eyes flicked toward the staircase, her voice steady, but edged with old pain. "My son, Richard's son. He is here." The air shifted. I felt it in my chest, a weight pressing down. All the years Richard had told me he was traveling alone, all the silences, all the unexplained absences. Suddenly, they weren't just shadows. They had faces, blood, a life that existed parallel to mine. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, heavy and purposeful. When he appeared, the resemblance was undeniable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the same gray as Richard's, sharpened into steel by bitterness. He paused on the last step, his gaze locking onto me. "So you're her," he said, his voice low, roughened by years of resentment. "The other wife. The woman he chose over my mother." I opened my mouth, but no words came. His anger was a storm, and I was standing at the center of it. Isabella rose, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Antonio, remember what I told you. This is not the time for blame." But Antonio shook her off, his eyes never leaving mine. All my life I watched him leave, promising to return. I thought he was traveling for business. I thought he was working to give us more. And then I learned the truth, that he had another family, you. His words cut through me like shards of glass. I wanted to defend myself, to insist that I had never known, that I had been as deceived as he. But the anger in his face demanded more than denial. It demanded recognition. I drew in a breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "If you want to fight me, Antonio, then fight me. But understand this. I did not steal him from you. I was just as blind, just as trapped in his lies. I am no thief. I am another piece on his board, moved without consent." For a moment, silence reigned, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. But something in my words seemed to reach him. He turned away sharply, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal. "You talk of being a pawn," he muttered, "but pawns still take sides." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but strong. "Then choose carefully, because the real enemy isn't standing here in this room. It's the ones who mocked me, who believe they've inherited everything, while what they hold is already crumbling." He froze, his back still to me. Slowly he turned, his expression torn between suspicion and curiosity. "What are you saying?" he asked. I let out the breath I had been holding. "Richard didn't leave me a ticket for no reason. He wanted me to come here to know the truth, and I believe he wanted me to join forces with you, not against you. Because what's coming, it will destroy the greedy, and we have a chance to make something real from the ruins." His eyes searched mine, wary, but no longer burning with blind fury. Isabella watched quietly, her hands clasped in her lap, her face unreadable. "Richard's death left us both with wounds," I continued. "But wounds can be turned into weapons if we are willing to see clearly. You lost a father who divided his love. I lost a husband who divided his truth, but neither of us has to lose what comes next, unless we turn against each other." Antonio's expression softened just a fraction. He sank into a chair across from me, rubbing his hands over his face. "I've hated you for years without even knowing you," he admitted. "But perhaps the man we should hate is the one who let us believe half-lives were enough." Isabella placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle now. "Antonio, maybe this is the moment to stop hating and start building." He didn't answer immediately, but his eyes returned to me, no longer brimming with rage, but with something heavier, a question. "If we don't fight each other," he said, his tone cautious, "then what do we do?" I leaned back, a strange calm spreading through me. "We wait, and we listen. Because Richard didn't leave us without direction. He left me a letter to open here, and something tells me it will show us the next move." Antonio's jaw tightened again, but not in anger, this time in thought. He looked at his mother, then back at me. "If that letter tells us what he truly planned, then maybe I'll hear you out." I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. "That's all I ask. Don't mistake me for your enemy. Not when the real enemy is still out there, laughing at what they think they've won." The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the stillness that followed. Antonio sat rigid, caught between the past and the possibility of something different. Isabella watched him, her expression softening with a mother's pride and sorrow. I realized then that Richard's game was larger than either of us had imagined. He had left wounds, yes, but he had also left threads that tied us together, forcing us to face one another not as rivals, but as reluctant allies. When Antonio finally spoke, his voice was low but steadier. "Then show me the letter. Show me what he left you." And in that moment, I knew the pawn had taken another step forward. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, as though every secret Richard had hidden pressed against its seams. I placed it gently on the oak table in Isabella's sitting room, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Antonio leaned forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, while Isabella stood silently by the window, her arms crossed. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was not only a folded letter, but also a flash drive, its metal surface gleaming faintly in the firelight. My breath caught. Richard had left more than words. He had left his voice, his face, a message he wanted us to hear directly. Antonio fetched an old laptop from a cabinet and set it on the table. When the screen flickered to life, the three of us leaned in. I slid the drive into place, and within seconds, Richard appeared. There he was, my husband, sitting in his study back home. His face was thinner, drawn by illness, but his eyes still carried that sharp glint of calculation. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "If you are watching this," he began, his voice steady, "then the board has shifted, and my pieces have begun to fall where I placed them long ago. Linda, you followed the ticket. Good. I knew you would. And Antonio, if you are here, then you too have chosen to listen. That gives me hope." Antonio stiffened, his jaw clenching. Isabella's breath hitched softly, but she remained silent. Richard continued, his tone measured, each word precise. "To the rest of the world, I left behind an empire of wealth, a company, estates, yachts. But you must understand, they are illusions. Whitmore Industries is drowning in debt. The company books are a house of cards propped up by lies and desperation. Charles's ambition drove me into ventures I knew were poison. Amelia whispered in his ear, feeding his hunger. They wanted expansion at any cost, and they believed I would always protect them, but I grew tired of shielding fools. I felt the words like a blade, slicing through the illusion of what Charles had inherited. My son, so smug at the funeral, had been handed a kingdom built on sand. Richard leaned closer to the camera, his eyes piercing. "Linda, you were the only one who visited me without asking for anything. You played chess with me, week after week, never for gain, but for the challenge itself. That is why I trusted you, not with scraps, as they believe, but with truth." He paused, his breath shallow, his voice rougher now. "The penthouse is mortgaged 3 times, the yacht leased, the Hamptons estate 70% owned by the bank. They will discover soon enough that I gave them nothing but the gilded shells of wealth, and when they do, their empire will collapse." Antonio's eyes flicked toward me, a spark of recognition igniting in his gaze. For the first time, his anger seemed to ease, replaced by something almost like respect. Richard shifted in his chair, pulling a folder into frame. He opened it, revealing deeds and documents. But here in Italy lies something real. Monturi Estate. The vineyard Isabella and I built together, brick by brick, vine by vine, 47 million in assets, producing 2 million bottles a year passed down through generations. Antonio, this is your inheritance. Linda, this is your shield. Together, it can be your future, if you choose to claim it. Isabella turned away, her shoulders trembling. The truth she had known alone for decades was now spoken aloud, undeniable. Richard's expression softened for the briefest moment. "I failed both of you, Linda and Isabella. I lived divided, and that was my greatest sin. But I leave you with this. Unity can heal where division once reigned. Do not waste what I built twice over. And do not fall into the trap Charles has already sprung for himself. His greed will undo him without your help." The fire crackled louder, filling the silence that followed. Richard leaned back, his face pale, his eyes darker. "One last thing," he said, his voice dropping. "When Charles calls you, Linda, and he will, do not rejoice in his downfall too quickly. Be stronger than vengeance. Offer him a place, not a throne, but a role. That will be the true victory. Remember, the best moves are the ones your opponent never sees coming. Checkmate, my love." The screen went black. The 3 of us sat in silence, the weight of Richard's words settling heavily. My heart pounded, torn between betrayal and vindication. He had given me nothing in public but everything in secret. Antonio was the first to speak, his voice low, almost hoarse. So he knew. He knew the company was finished. He let Charles walk into ruin. I nodded slowly. He gave them the illusions they worshipped, and he gave us what was real. Isabella finally turned, her face pale but resolute. He left us more than land and wine. He left us the choice to stand together. The question is, will we? I stared into the dying fire, Richard's voice still echoing in my mind. Revenge had always been a tempting flame, but now strategy burned brighter. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about building something they could never destroy. I turned to Antonio, meeting his eyes directly. "Your father set the pieces. Now it's our turn to move them." For the first time, Antonio's hardened expression broke. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Then let's make our move." The moment the screen went dark, we all understood what we had. The letter and the film had been a map, and the map had led me into a room with 2 allies I had never expected to stand beside me. We did not cheer, we did not celebrate. We sat in the quiet, letting the magnitude of what Richard had left sink in around us, like wine settling to the bottom of a carafe. Antonio broke the silence first. He folded his hands and looked at me in a way that had moved from suspicion to calculation. "So what now?" he asked. "He tells us what's real, but he doesn't tell us how to use it." Isabella's eyes never left mine. She had already begun to imagine rows of vines and barrels of aging wine, but she also understood the world we had left behind, one where money talks louder than truth. I felt a clarity settle over me that was almost physical. This was not a moment for revenge that burned hot and blind. This was a moment for a quiet, meticulous unmaking. Richard had built a stage and placed his players on it. They had strutted with the arrogance only fools possess. Now we would let their performance end under the weight of consequences. "First," I said, speaking slowly so each word hit the table like a note in a measured score, "we keep our circle small. Not everyone here needs to know everything. The fewer people who know what we know, the fewer people who can betray it." Antonio nodded. He had been raised to protect the family's secrets, and now that instinct had a new target. "Second," Isabella continued, her voice steady, "we secure the legal papers that prove the estate here is real and unassailable. My family has kept deeds, receipts, and records for decades. We will inventory everything and make copies. We will have lawyers ready on both sides of the ocean. If Charles tries to claim anything here, the paperwork will choke him." She sounded like the woman who had kept ledgers through decades of harvests and debt. Her competence filled the room with a kind of quiet security. I added the next step, one that required patience and discipline, virtues my enemies had little of. "We do nothing public until the house of cards collapses on its own. Let Charles and Amelia inherit the illusion. Let the market and his advisors find the truth in their own books. When they call, when they beg, then we will decide what they deserve. We let them fall on the teeth of their own greed first." My voice did not tremble. I had seen greed in my son's face. I had felt its heat. Letting it consume him felt like planting a seed that would grow into something useful rather than burning into ash. Antonio rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "And how do we handle the press? They will smell blood when the company falters." He had a point. In America, scandal was a currency, and public perception moved markets faster than balance sheets. Isabella's lips pressed together. She had known the courting of reputation was as much work as tending vines. "We craft the narrative," I said. "We control it in increments. First, secure the estate legally. Then, when the collapse begins, we leak the truth to a journalist who is both hungry and ethical, someone who will present facts, not theater. We ensure the story about debt and leases is rock solid, but we do not gloat. We present evidence, not vengeance." I had learned over the years that dignity in public turns spite into shame for the other side. Antonio nodded slowly. "And then?" he asked. "Then we offer Charles his place," I replied, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "But not the throne. We offer him a role that requires work. If he accepts, he learns humility and earns respect. If he refuses, that is on him. He will have had his chance to step into the real world and failed." The memory of Richard's final words rose up in me, advising mercy and strategy. It was a measure of justice I could live with. Satisfaction without cruelty, consequence without cruelty's ugliness. Isabella looked at me, a shadow of something like approval passing over her features. "And Amelia?" she asked. The name fell between us like a stone. "She will be exposed if she tries to manipulate legal counsel or bribe officials," I said. "We will be ready with records, with witnesses, with proof. If she has recordings or evidence of scheming, as your lawyers will uncover, we will make sure they surface at the precise moment they will cause the most unraveling." I did not relish the thought of ruining someone, but I knew Amelia had built her life on other people's shadows. There was no honor in allowing that to continue. Antonio leaned forward, an intensity replacing the woundedness I had first seen. "What about our workers, the people who depend on the vineyard, the families here?" He had every right to be wary. A takeover can feed the powerful and starve the small. I would not be complicit in that. "We protect them," Isabella said without hesitation. "Contracts will be honored. We will prioritize wages. The vineyard is not an asset to be pillaged. It is a life for these people. We will not let it be used as a bargaining chip." Her voice carried the authority of a woman who knew the value of labor and the consequences of ruin. My plan was forming into a sequence of actions: legal fortification, quiet documentation, a controlled narrative, and a public offering of work rather than title to the foolish. Each piece was deliberate. Each move required time and restraint. I imagined Charles and Amelia waking one morning to find lenders calling, suits filed, creditors circling like scavengers. I imagined their confidence cracking under pressure, and when they reached for me with a plea on their lips, I would have the power to choose the terms of their return. Antonio tapped the table, thinking out loud. We need a public event, not a victory party, but an unveiling, a wine launch, a proper introduction of the estate to the world. That will be our stage for facts and for mercy. We will invite partners, distributors, and 1 or 2 journalists. We will not gloat. We will show the reality and the work behind it. I allowed myself the smallest smile. The image of Charles in a suit, standing awkwardly among people who understood craft and labor, was oddly satisfying. We will plan the launch when the timing is right, I said. When the company in the States is already bleeding and the press is asking questions, we will hold our event. We will let the facts speak for themselves. Isabella rose, her posture now the posture of someone ready for action rather than grief. Then we begin tomorrow, she said. Inventory, lawyers, affidavits. We gather every document and witness we can find. I folded my hands in my lap and felt the envelope heavy against my palm through the table. And we keep a record of Amelia, I said, the sentence sharp as flint. If she moves against us, the world will see how she played people. Antonio's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw not a stranger in his gaze, but a co-conspirator of fate. The board was set, and the players in my life had no idea that the smallest piece was already becoming a force. We would not rush. We would not rage. We would be precise. Then let us begin, he said finally, the words carrying the weight of commitment. Isabella poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me, a ritual of partnership and of promise. I lifted the glass and tasted it, a hint of cherry, the spice of sun-baked earth, and felt the future settle around me like a cloak. We would wait. We would document. We would let their empire reveal itself for what it was. When they reached out to me begging, I would answer, but I would answer on terms I dictated, and that I thought would be the sweetest justice of all. The first call came in the middle of the night. I had been lying awake, the air cool against my skin, thinking about Richard's last words on that video. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, and when I picked it up, the sound of my son's voice filled the silence. But it was not the voice of triumph I had heard at the funeral. It was cracked, desperate. "Mother," Charles whispered, his breathing uneven, "I need your help." For a long moment, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, knowing it was the one thing he hated most. He had always filled silence with arrogance, with noise, with performance. Now the emptiness pressed against him until he broke it himself. "The company, it's falling apart. The auditors uncovered debts I didn't know about. Investors are pulling out. The bank is demanding collateral we don't have." His words tumbled over each other, frantic, clumsy. "Amelia, she's leaving me. She says there's nothing left to stay for." I sat up slowly, my hand gripping the edge of the blanket. Images flashed in my mind. His smug grin at the funeral, the way he had waved the yacht keys as though they were a crown. Now he sounded like a child again, frightened of the dark. "What happened to the yacht, Charles?" I asked softly. He hesitated, his voice breaking. "It was never ours. It was leased. The payments. God, I can't even cover them. And the penthouse? Foreclosed. Gone. The company? Bankrupt," he admitted, the word shattering him as it left his lips. "It's gone, Mother. Everything is gone." I closed my eyes, hearing Richard's voice again. "Do not rejoice in his downfall too quickly. Offer him a place, not a throne." My heart ached with the weight of it. Revenge would have been easy, satisfying even, but this was justice wrapped in choice. "You once laughed," I said slowly, my voice calm but unyielding, When the lawyer handed me a wrinkled envelope. Do you remember?" He was silent, but I could hear his breathing catch. "You laughed because you thought it meant nothing. You laughed because you believed I was finished, and now here you are, calling me with nothing left in your hands but regret." "Please," he whispered. "Please, Mother. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go." For the first time, his pride had crumbled completely. Amelia's betrayal had been the final blow. She had left him the way she had entered his life, calculating, cold, seeking only what she could take. And when the illusions Richard had crafted collapsed, she had been quick to abandon the ruins. "You'll come to Rome," I told him. "You'll come with nothing but yourself. And when you arrive, you will not be my heir. You will not be my savior. You will be a worker, a servant to something real. If you want to stand in my world, you'll stand as a laborer, not a lord." He choked back a sob. "I'll do anything, just don't turn me away." I let the silence linger a moment longer before answering. "We'll see if you mean those words when you're on the soil here. I'll send for you. But understand this, what you inherit is not wealth. It is responsibility. Fail once, and you'll be gone for good." When I ended the call, the house was still. I could almost hear Richard's voice echoing through the halls of the villa. Offer him a place, not a throne. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of power I now held. The next morning, Isabella and Antonio listened quietly as I told them of the call. Antonio's jaw tightened, his bitterness still raw. "You'll let him come here?" "Yes," I said, "because mercy is not weakness. It is strategy. Let him taste labor. Let him sweat in the vineyard. Let him see that dignity comes not from inheritance, but from effort." Isabella's eyes softened. "You are wiser than I expected, Linda. Richard was right to trust you." I said nothing, only gazed out at the rows of vines stretching across the hills. Charles's downfall had begun with arrogance. Now it would be complete with humility, or it would be nothing at all. Either way, the pawn had moved again, and the king was trembling. The night of the wine launch arrived with a sky clear as crystal. The villa glowed under strings of golden lights, the vineyards stretching out like a sea of emerald beneath the stars. Guests arrived in sleek cars, their laughter carrying across the courtyard as they gathered for the unveiling of Monturi's newest vintage. It was not merely a celebration of wine. It was a stage, carefully prepared, where truth would be poured into every glass. I stood at the top of the stone steps, wearing a dress the color of midnight, my silver hair pinned back in a crown of simplicity. For years, I had been overlooked, dismissed as the quiet widow in the corner. Tonight, there would be no mistaking me. Every detail of this evening had been chosen with intention: the music, the speeches, the press invited to witness, but above all, the timing. Charles arrived late. When he stepped into the courtyard, the crowd shifted. He looked smaller somehow, his suit ill-fitted, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of failure. The arrogance he had once worn like armor was gone, replaced by desperation. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found me. He pushed through the guests, his voice breaking as he called, "Mother!" The crowd hushed. Heads turned, curious. The son who had once been praised as heir was now a supplicant, trembling in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. He reached me at the steps, his face pale, his voice cracking. "Please, let me speak to you. Don't do this here." But I held my ground. "No, Charles. This is the perfect place." I turned to the gathered guests, raising my glass so the candlelight caught its ruby glow. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, clear, carrying across the courtyard. "Tonight, you taste the future of Monturi, but before we drink, let me introduce someone." I gestured toward Charles, whose face drained of color. "This is my son. At my husband's funeral, he laughed when I was handed nothing but a wrinkled envelope with a single plane ticket. He stood proud, believing he had inherited wealth and power, but what he received were shadows, illusions, and what I received, the very thing mocked by my own blood, was the key to what you see here tonight." The crowd shifted, murmurs rising. Charles lowered his head, shame burning across his face. I set my glass down and stepped closer to him, my voice dropping, intimate but sharp enough to cut. "Do you remember, Charles? Do you remember how you laughed? And now here you are, empty-handed, begging at the door of the very world you once scorned." His lips parted, his voice raw. "Mother, please." I did not let him finish. I lifted my voice again for all to hear. "The pawn they mocked, the one they thought worthless, is the very piece that now commands the board." Gasps rippled through the guests. Phones were raised, flashes of cameras capturing the moment. I turned slowly, letting the silence settle, letting the truth sink into the crowd. Then I added the words Richard had once whispered across a chessboard. "A pawn may be small, but when it reaches the other side, it becomes the queen." The applause came suddenly, a roar of approval sweeping through the courtyard. Some clapped out of shock, others out of admiration. But every pair of eyes was on me. Not on Charles, not on Amelia, not on the hollow empire they had lost. On me. Charles fell to his knees, his voice breaking. "I will do anything, just don't shut me out." I looked down at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "Then you will sign a contract to work for Monturi, not as an heir, not as a master, as a laborer, earning every step you take. This is the only place for you now. Accept it or leave with nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone waited to see what he would do. At last, Charles nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'll do it. I'll work." I extended a hand, not to help him up, but to place the papers in his grip. "Then begin here. Tonight, the world knows who you are, not the king you pretended to be, but a man who must learn humility." The crowd erupted again, some astonished, some moved, some scandalized. It didn't matter. The truth had been spoken in the open, and no one could erase it. I lifted my glass once more. To Monturi, to truth, to the vine that grows stronger after the storm. Guests raised their glasses, the clinking of crystal ringing like a bell. And as I looked out over the sea of faces, I knew Richard would have smiled at this moment. His game was complete, and I was the one holding the queen. The applause from the launch still echoed in my ears long after the courtyard emptied. The journalists had gathered their quotes, the guests had lifted their glasses, and the whispers of scandal had spread like wildfire. Charles had signed the papers under the weight of hundreds of eyes, his pen trembling, his pride bleeding out onto the page. But I knew this was not the end. It was the pivot. The moment when power shifted completely, from those who had laughed at me to the woman they thought they had cast aside. The next morning, the Monturi estate bustled with activity. Distributors were clamoring for contracts. Workers moved with renewed energy, knowing their future was secured. Antonio stood at the head of logistics, reviewing shipments with precision, while Claire, my granddaughter, my quiet observer, sat across from him, drafting marketing strategies with a confidence that surprised even me. I watched them from the balcony, the younger generation shaping something real, something lasting. For the first time in years, I felt the stirring of legacy, not as a word, but as a living, breathing force. But Amelia was not gone. She appeared later that afternoon, uninvited, sweeping into the villa in a tailored dress that spoke of money she no longer possessed. Her eyes darted across the courtyard, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "You always did love theatrics, Linda," she said coolly, her voice carrying across the marble. "Public humiliation, contracts signed in front of strangers, clever. But do you really think this performance will last?" I did not flinch. "It's not a performance when the foundation is real, Amelia. That's something you've never understood." Her smile thinned. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You can have your vineyard, but you can't erase the world Charles and I built. People know me, they trust me, I can still ruin you." I studied her, calm as still water. Then, with deliberate care, I reached into my bag and withdrew a small recorder. I pressed play. Her voice filled the air, sharp, calculating, unmistakable. "Push him to sign over everything, Amelia. He doesn't have the head for business. Keep him distracted. I'll take care of the lawyer. By the time his mother realizes, it'll all be ours." Her own words, cold as glass, played back in front of her. Claire stepped out from the shadows, a document in her hand. "We've already filed this recording with counsel. If you make a move against us, the evidence becomes public. Fraud, manipulation. Your reputation will collapse faster than Charles's company did." Amelia's mask cracked. For the first time, fear flashed in her eyes. "You wouldn't—" I stepped closer, my voice cutting through her protest. "I don't need to. You will destroy yourself if you push further. Walk away now, Amelia. Disappear, or you will watch the last of your name dissolve." She trembled, her nails digging into her palms, but she said nothing more. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the villa, her heels striking the marble like a drumbeat of defeat. Charles, who had been watching from the corner, looked at me with hollow eyes. He had once thought Amelia his partner, his shield. Now he saw her for what she was, a viper that slithered away the moment the fire grew too hot. I handed him a ledger, thick with pages of orders and harvest schedules. "This is your life now. You wanted to inherit an empire without lifting a hand. Here you'll earn every grain of respect with sweat. Work or leave. The choice is yours." His hands shook as he took it, but he nodded. For the first time, humility lingered in his face. Perhaps he would learn, perhaps not, but the contract bound him, and the world had already seen his submission. That alone was enough. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the vines, I sat with Isabella and Antonio at the long wooden table outside. Claire joined us, her face glowing with youthful determination. Antonio raised his glass. "To survival," he said. "No," I corrected gently, lifting my own. "To power earned, not given. To roots that run deeper than greed." Claire smiled, her voice soft but sure. "And to truth, because lies can burn fast and bright, but truth endures." I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. She had been quiet at the funeral, a shadow in the corner, but now she stood tall, ready to shape the world with her own hands. Richard's blood ran in her veins, yes, but so did mine. And it was my strength she carried forward. The night air was cool, the stars sharp above us. For the first time in a long time, I felt no fear. The empire Charles and Amelia had clung to was dust. The vineyard thrived. The family I had gained here was stronger than the one I had nearly lost. And in the silence that followed our toast, I realized the truth Richard had hidden in every move of his game. Power is not inherited, it is built. And once built, it cannot be mocked away. The morning after Amelia's retreat, the Monturi estate seemed to breathe differently. The tension that had hung like fog now lifted, replaced by a rhythm of life I hadn't felt in years. Workers filled the vineyard rows, their laughter carrying through the crisp air. Trucks rumbled down the dirt road, bound for markets that were already buzzing with anticipation of our new brand. It wasn't just business. It was life, renewing itself, rooted in soil, sweat, and quiet determination. I walked through the vines with Claire at my side. She studied everything with sharp eyes, taking notes in her little leather book. "This isn't just wine, Grandma," she said softly. "This is story. This is family. People don't just buy bottles. They buy the feeling that comes with them." Her words made me smile. "That's why you'll be the one to tell the story. Not me, not Richard, you. Because you understand that power is in the telling, not just the making." Later in the courtyard, Isabella waited for us. She stood with Antonio, her hand resting gently on his arm. Her eyes met mine, not with suspicion as before, but with something closer to acceptance. She motioned toward a small clay pot by her feet. Inside was a young vine, no more than a few leaves stretching for the sun. "This was planted from cuttings Richard gave me years ago," Isabella said. "It has waited long enough to take root in open soil. I want you to have it." I knelt and touched the tender leaves, their green so vivid against the brown earth. "Then let's plant it together," I said. We chose a spot near the oldest vines, where the soil was rich and the sun fell strongest in the afternoon. Claire dug, while Antonio held the young plant steady. When the roots were covered, Isabella poured a jug of water from the well. The earth drank greedily, sealing the moment. I pressed my hand into the damp soil and whispered, "This one will grow from 2 roots, yours and mine." Antonio straightened, his face serious, but softer than I had ever seen. Maybe for the first time my mother and I can stop resenting the other life Richard chose. Maybe now we can honor both. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. Families aren't always what they're supposed to be. Sometimes they're what we make them. And maybe that's stronger. In that moment, the fractures of betrayal felt less jagged. The anger that had once divided us began to feel like history, still painful, but no longer defining. That evening, we shared dinner at the long oak table in the villa. Antonio poured glasses from the first batch bottled under the new label. The wine was dark, rich, carrying the scent of the hillsides. Claire sketched out designs for a campaign on scraps of parchment. Isabella told stories of Richard in his younger years, how he once fixed a tractor with little more than a shoelace and stubborn pride, how he would hum old Navy songs as he walked the rows at dusk. I listened, and for the first time, I allowed myself to laugh at the memory of my husband. His secrets had cut deep, but they had also led me here, to a family I had never imagined, to a future I had never dared to dream. As the candles burned low, Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "Grandma," she whispered, "I thought I lost you at that funeral, but maybe that envelope saved us all." I kissed her hair. Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest gifts. That's what Richard wanted us to learn. And when the night grew quiet, I found myself in the study, staring at an old photograph Isabella had placed on the wall. Richard stood between her and me, one hand on each of our shoulders, smiling as if he had never carried 2 lives on his back. For the first time, I didn't feel anger at the sight. Instead, I felt an odd peace. He had been a flawed man, but in his flawed way, he had given me one final chance to build something real. The house settled into silence. From the balcony, I could hear Antonio and Claire talking by the vineyard, their voices low and steady. They were building trust, weaving something new. Isabella passed through the hall and touched my arm gently. "We are different women, Linda," she said, "but maybe we are stronger together than apart." I nodded. Stronger, yes, and perhaps wiser. The vine we planted that day stood under the moonlight, fragile yet rooted. It was a promise, a reminder that families could grow even from fractured soil. And in that promise, I found something that no fortune, no yacht, no penthouse could ever equal. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about legacy, the kind not written in wills or contracts, but in earth, in hands joined across old grudges, in new roots that dared to grow side by side. The courtyard was quiet in the late afternoon, the sun dipping low enough to cast long shadows across the vineyard. The vine Isabella and I had planted only days ago caught the light, its fragile leaves glowing like stained glass. I sat at the wooden chess table Richard had once used, a simple board spread between me and Antonio. The pieces were carved from olive wood, worn smooth from decades of games. Antonio studied the board with narrowed eyes. He moved his rook forward with confidence. "You always protect your queen too much," he said, echoing a criticism I had once heard from Richard. "Maybe you're afraid to lose her." I smiled faintly, fingers brushing across the queen before sliding her diagonally, directly into the path of his bishop. He blinked. "You sacrificed her?" "Yes," I said, leaning back. "Sometimes the only way to win is to let go of what everyone else believes is indispensable." Antonio shook his head, a laugh escaping him. "That's ruthless, Linda." "No," I replied softly. "That's survival. That's wisdom. Power isn't about what you cling to. It's about knowing when to release something so you can grasp what truly matters. I could almost hear Richard's voice in the air, whispering the same lesson he had tried to leave me with. But now it wasn't his game anymore. It was mine. Claire arrived then, her hair swept back, carrying a notebook full of numbers and plans. She leaned on the back of my chair, watching the board. "You always told me, Grandma, that history is written by those who endure," she said. "But I think maybe history is written by those who know what to let go of and what to fight for." I reached up and patted her hand. "You've been listening well." As we played, my mind drifted back to the funeral, the applause, the smirks, the yacht keys jingling in my son's hand, the laughter that followed when all I was given was a crumpled envelope. I had walked out of that room mocked and pitied. Yet here I was, sitting in a villa older than any skyscraper in New York, surrounded by family I had never expected, overseeing land that would outlast us all. Justice had not come as a hammer, but as something more subtle, more enduring. It had come through patience, through silence, through letting those who mocked me collapse under the weight of their own greed. My revenge was not a single moment of triumph. It was the quiet permanence of truth, revealed piece by piece until it could no longer be denied. The irony was delicious. Charles had inherited a yacht that wasn't his, a penthouse shackled by debt, a company drowning in red ink. He had laughed at me for clutching a plane ticket, but that single slip of paper carried more than all his illusions combined. It carried the map to everything real, everything lasting. It carried me here. I set my final piece down, and Antonio's eyes widened. "Checkmate," I said simply. He exhaled, then grinned. "You play just like him," he admitted. "No," I corrected. "I play like myself. Richard thought he was orchestrating the final game, but he was wrong. He only set the pieces. I was the one who finished it." The wind moved softly through the vines, carrying the scent of earth and grape. I looked at the rows stretching across the hills, the workers moving among them, the laughter of Claire and Antonio as they teased each other about strategy. This was legacy, not the hollow legacy of yachts and penthouses, but something rooted, growing, breathing. I thought of Richard one last time, not with bitterness, not with sorrow, but with clarity. He had tried to live two lives, torn between two truths. In the end, he gave me the chance to build something whole out of the fractures. Perhaps that was his final gift. The bottle of wine he had labeled for me, Eredita, Inheritance, sat unopened in the study. Someday I would open it. Perhaps on Claire's wedding or Antonio's first harvest celebration. Perhaps when I was gone, they would open it together and remember the woman who had refused to bow when laughter filled the room. For now, it was enough to know it waited, just as the future waited, just as the vineyard itself waited for the next season. As the last light of day slipped across the hills, I whispered to myself, "The best inheritance isn't what you're given. It's what you're trusted to continue." The words lingered in the air, as steady as the vines, as enduring as the roots. My story had begun with humiliation, but it ended with clarity. And in that clarity was power, not the fleeting kind my son had once cheered for, but the kind no one could ever take away. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength.